My vision for this program is very simple. Okay, we are going to build the premier football program in the country. Okay, we are not going to talk about it anymore. We are going to be about it.
Howdy and welcome back to the Ineligibles podcast. My name is Will Stone, a solo show here for you tonight. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. YouTube has been so good to us. You guys have been so good to us. I found it's the best way to get our stuff, get our content out there, and exposed to a new audience. And it's done just that. And we are up to before I hit the button tonight to go live, we had 200 subscribers on the dot. So that was going to be my goal last week, is to get to 200 before the season. We're already there. So if we can get it to 300 before August 31st, let's do it. But if you're not a YouTube person, I get it. I listen to all my stuff on Apple Podcasts, so you can find us there as well. It's just a little bit later, and you cannot watch it live on there. And we have other cool stuff coming up on YouTube. So even if you don't watch the show there every time, just go ahead and subscribe. There's going to be stuff that you don't want to miss. But sorry for the audio issues on that last one. I had been messing with my microphone all afternoon, and I actually got it fixed the way I wanted, and then just forgot to turn the volume back up. So apologies for that. Unfortunately, YouTube will not let me go back and fix the audio after the fact. So yeah, that's just the way it is. But great conversation with Robert Behrens on Monday night. Yeah, I think I said this to them, but I'll say it now. Monday nights and Wednesday nights are the plan from now until, January. And probably around 8 o'clock. That's very flexible, but definitely we'll shoot for 8 every night. I've got travel, stuff like that, but that is the plan as of right now. So, but yeah, so far most of our shows since we kind of kicked back up have been very focused on Texas A&M, on our players, which I think I've gotten my point across as far as the roster goes and things like that. So I wanted to spend this one. And I've gotten some requests to do this, but looking at the A&M schedule and looking more at the opponents and not necessarily as much about A&M. And you're looking at our guys, our position groups that we've been hitting on. How do those stack up against the teams that we're going to be playing, and maybe some teams across the country. But I think first of all, we touched on the injury on Monday to Notre Dame left tackle Charles Jagasaw. He was the expected starter. Out for the year, torn pectoral muscle. So that's a big hit for them. If he comes back stronger than ever next year. But that's a pretty big hit to what was already a pretty young and inexperienced group. And looking at some of their practice stuff this week, it sounds like they're going to keep the right tackle there. I thought they might move him over, Emil Wagner. He's a younger guy, so I think they're like, hey, you've been learning right. We're just going to keep you right at right tackle where you're comfortable. And then they're going to put Tosh Baker, who I think is a fifth-year senior at left tackle. He's been getting the reps with the ones there, but and he's a big kid, 6'8", probably 320 plus, but not the best feet for a tackle, especially in this first matchup against A&M. So we'll talk more and more about that as that game gets closer, but we're certainly have that circled. Other news, running back for Texas, C.J. Baxter, who was looking to be the lead back after Jonathan Brooks is off to the NFL. He had a knee injury. It was not an ACL. I think it was maybe a PCL and MCL. But requires surgery. He is also out for the season. That's a big blow to Texas, and they've got some guys there still, and thoughts and prayers up for Baxter, and hope it's not gonna derail his career or anything. Hopefully he can get back and come back strong. You don't wish that on anybody, but for this season and for what Texas wants to do, I thought he was going to be a big piece. And he's a stud running back. He truly is. I like our guys and what they can do, what they are capable of. But Baxter showed quite a bit already in college, even just as a true freshman last year. So that's a big hit. They still got Jaden Blue. I know they signed a really good freshman running back. He will probably be more in the mix now. But it's that time of year. The pads start coming on. You start scrimmaging, and you just pray it's not your team or your guys. And it's the worst part of the game. But obligatory. Knock on some wood on my wood desk. This is real wood. It's not a piece of crap. So hopefully that's some good luck. But so yeah, the A&M schedule. I think there's a couple different ways that I want to kind of break this down, but I think we can just start with just a broad overview of what is of how this thing of what the schedule is and how it shakes out. I think I touched on it maybe on the first solo one that we did, but there's a big four, as A&M fans kind of have circled, and that's what the odds say. It's what the power ratings say, is that these four teams are the toughest, and then there's a drop off, and then there's the rest of that after that. But those four are Notre Dame, Missouri, LSU, and Texas, and they're all spaced out. They're all at home. So let's run through it real quick. So first game, obviously, August 31st, week 1, Notre Dame at home. Huge opportunity. It's looking like it could be a really good matchup for A&M. Go out and win that one, and you're playing with house money basically. So after that, you host McNeese. You ought to win that one, and then it gets interesting. You go at Florida, then you come back home and host Bowling Green. You play Arkansas at Jerry World. Then you come home and host Missouri, and then it's a bye. First bye week. There's 2 this year, so that's your first 6, and then we are at Mississippi State. At home against LSU, at South Carolina, another bye, and then at home against New Mexico State, the Aggies, at Auburn, and then at home against Texas. So it's, compared to some of the ones we've seen, this is pretty manageable. We've talked about it. There's no Georgia, there's no Bama, there's no Ole Miss, there's no Tennessee, there's no Oklahoma. You play Texas, but you play them at home, in a hostile environment for them. But there's no back-to-back road games. I remember the first season A&M played in the SEC, and it ended up being not as bad because a couple of these teams weren't any good. But they had 3 straight road games, like no bye week. I think it was at Auburn, at Mississippi State, and at Alabama. And we were like, gosh, like could they do us any worse? Give us three road games back to back to back, but. You don't have that here. You really don't even have, not until the end do you even have likely bowl teams back to back with Auburn and Texas. I mean, McNeese doesn't count. They're FCS. Bowling Green, if they make a bowl, they're not Power 5, so that doesn't really count. But like Arkansas, probably won't make a bowl. Then Missouri, then at Mississippi State, they're not going to make a bowl. At South Carolina, maybe. I doubt it. But it's just it breaks really well, and there's no like, oh my gosh, like you look at Texas and their schedule's pretty manageable, but they have to play Oklahoma at the Cotton Bowl and then play Georgia at home the very next week. There's no bye week in between, and I'm sure everyone's got their own kind of mix of that, but I guess you could say at Auburn and then Texas at home is not the easiest stretch. Like Auburn's a tough place to play. They should be a better team, but yeah, it's not that bad, and this team's pretty good. So they should go out and be able to, win 9 games, maybe win 10 games. We'll see. But these A&M opponents, we talked a ton about Notre Dame. I don't want to spend too much time on them, but I did write an article today. I think it will go live tomorrow about Florida, and they've been a team that I haven't really been able to get a really good feel for. They weren't great last year. They had a little bit of bad luck, but also just a lot of bad football on their part. They had turnover on the defensive coaching staff. They kept the coordinator. They let everybody else go. Guys who were good coaches like Sean Spencer, who is now here at A&M on the defensive line. Corey Raymond, who is a savant of a defensive back coach. LSU is very happy to have him back. And they've entrusted it to their young defensive coordinator, who's, I think he's maybe 30 or 31, a pretty young guy, not super experienced, but hey, that's what they wanted to do. So we'll see how it works out. But they had, on all these articles, I'm writing the players that left in the transfer portal and the players they brought in, and it was way longer than the one that I wrote for Notre Dame. And like it's when you compare the two, and I only did this because they're two of the first three games, but Notre Dame is just so much more proven than Florida. And I'm trying to look at them and see like what's good about Florida. Like what do they do well? Well, they had two good running backs last year. One of them, Trevor Etienne, yes, the brother of Travis, is now like was good for them last year. Now he's at Georgia. He was voted preseason All-SEC here recently. But they still have the guy that led them in rushing last year in Montrell Johnson. So he's back, but they lost a couple of starting guards to the transfer portal. They brought in a tackle to start at right tackle for them from San Diego State. So, and he could be a good player. You know, they got, I think the center is pretty good. The left tackle, Austin Barber, he should be a pretty decent player. But I wouldn't say O-line is like a strength for them. You know, I think if Montrell Johnson, like I think he had a little minor knee surgery, which, you know, you never want any kind of knee surgery, but if it is minor, you know, maybe that won't be too bad. But I think he's a good player, but I don't know if the offensive line is, you know, I would take ours over theirs, to be quite honest. Even though that's a position of, you know, quote unquote weakness or uncertainty. Their receiver group, you know, we talk about ours, but you know they lost a first round pick off of their team at receiver, Ricky Pearsall, picked by the 49ers. They had a freshman last year who was really good, Trey Wilson. So coming into his second year, I think he was preseason second team All-SEC. He should be good, but aside from him, it's a bunch of like question marks, and like we don't really know. Like they got a transfer from Wisconsin who's, you know, okay. They got a transfer from Arizona State who, you know, I think had some medical stuff. He seems like he's fine now. But you know, is that are they gonna even be as good as they were last year? Can they get better than that? I don't think either of the guys they brought in as a first round pick like Ricky Pearsall was, but you know, it's just very uncertain. What's interesting about the guy that is good, Trey Wilson, you know, as far as, so when I try to get some more information without having to watch every single game that Florida played, I'm looking at PFF a lot. So if I quote a statistic and I don't attribute it to PFF right away, just know that's where I get like 90% of my stats from. So especially stuff like these more advanced stats. But so Graham Mertz, the quarterback at Florida, he was dead last in the country among Power 5 quarterbacks in average depth of target. So that's how far down the field is the receiver when you're throwing the football to them. Like, are you taking a lot of deep shots? Are you just, you know, airing it out? Are you just dumping it off, throwing a lot of screens? You know, like Quinn Ewers, for example, doesn't have a very high, so it's referred to as ADOT. So I'm just going to call it that from here on out. But like Quinn Ewers, Bo Nix, like those teams throw a lot of short stuff and let their guys just kind of go to work. Florida was, how you want to see it, the best or the worst. Like he had the lowest ADOT among any Power 5 quarterback at like 6.4, I think, which is very low. Like an average is like 10 or 11. So that's interesting. I've heard, you know, guys on Florida podcasts say that we want to stretch the field more. Can he do that? He didn't do it at all last year. So was that a receiver thing, or is it a Graham Mertz thing, or is it a play calling thing, you know? And then I go look at Trey Wilson. You can also see ADOT on receivers on, you know, where are their routes, how far are their routes run when they're getting targeted. His was dead last by an even wider margin at 2.2 yards average depth of target. Like, that is so low that's like every pass you're getting is a screen pass or like a little, dig or slant or something like that. It's kind of crazy. I'd have to go back and look at see if anyone ever had a lower one than that. I mean, and I'm not trying to dog Trey Wilson. I think he's a good player, but it seemed like all they really did with him was just run screens and little short stuff. So we'll see if they can open that up. If their O line will let them open that up. But overall, Graham Mertz caught a lot of crap last year before before the season started. He was okay. QBRs in the as far as national ranking was like in the 40s, I think. So he wasn't terrible. He wasn't great. Didn't turn the ball over, which is good, but only threw like 20 touchdowns, and he was just fine. He's not going to go out there and make a big difference. And that kind of, I didn't write a lot of notes for this, so this may be a bit all over the place, but a big theme when I'm looking at A&M's opponents is there's several games on here that I think A&M will have a decisive advantage at quarterback and an even bigger advantage in coaching. So I think Elko is a phenomenal game day head coach. I don't think Billy Napier is at Florida. I think he's a pretty mediocre head coach, to be quite honest. And I think Connor Wigman is a far better quarterback than Graham Mertz. I mean, that's just kind of the way it is. Now, Notre Dame, I think Riley Leonard is a lot closer to Connor than Mertz. That's coaching way closer. I think Marcus Freeman is a pretty good football coach. Al Golden is a very good defensive coordinator up there. So, and then we saw they got LSU's offensive coordinator from the last couple seasons, Mike Denbrock. We saw what he did last year, and had Heisman winning quarterback and 2 first-round receivers. So he can coach as well. But Florida, man, I think that game scares a lot of people. Not scares, but you're a little bit nervous about it because it is the first road game. We have not won on the road since 2021, and I get it. It's the swamp, famous tough place to play. But man, the more I look into Florida, I don't know if I see it. Real quick on their defense, on their defensive line, they had one guy last year that was a true difference maker, and now he plays for Ole Miss in Princely Umami Ellen. He's a Manor kid right down the street from me. So good player, will very likely get drafted, and probably somewhere on day 2 if I had to guess. But like led them in every defensive line category. 42 pressures, 11 and a half tackles for loss, 7 sacks. Like I think for every one for pressures and for sacks, you would have to add up the rest of the defensive line for Florida to equal those numbers. Tackles for loss, it wasn't quite that bad, but after you get past the first couple, like one guy had 4, one guy had 3, and then it was like 1, 1, 1, half. And I think they have some good players. They got a kid, 88, Caleb Banks. He's a good player, but if he's the best one, and like their edge guys, with Princely gone, those guys didn't really do a lot last year. They got a guy from Northern Illinois who's a MAC guy, and hey, A&M got a MAC guy in Cassius Howell, but you go check the numbers. I mean, Cassius Howell, I think, tied for the lead in sacks in the conference and had 42 pressures. The kid from Northern Illinois, George Gums, he had 17 pressures, so, and like, I think 3 or 4 sacks. So I'm sure he's a fine player, but I mean, is that the guy that's going to make the big difference and replace that production that you just lost? How can you get after the quarterback, with this front? Are you going to blitz? It's just, when stacking up D lines on the schedule, Florida is not one that, honestly, there's not a ton of great ones, but yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't really know. Now, their linebackers, I do like them. Shamar James is a former 5-star. He's another Shamar that we actually tried to recruit and ended up sticking with Florida. And then another guy that A&M went after, Pup Howard he actually signed with South Carolina, played with them last year, and now is transferred to Florida. He should probably, I think he's going to start next to Shamar James. Those two are good players. And Howard is young. He's a true sophomore. He played, was in the rotation at South Carolina last season, but didn't play just a whole lot. But can those two take another step and be, and be a good run defense, unit? Their secondary, I have no clue. They got Jason Marshall, who was a 5-star, supposed to be a big draft pick, hasn't done a whole lot. They had a true freshman safety that played pretty well, but I don't really, I think they need a little bit more out of that spot. They took some transfers. I know Asa Turner came from Washington. He's experienced, but he's kind of banged up. There's another corner they like, Devin Moore, who's kind of banged up. But it just, when I look at the whole team, when I said everything I just said, and you can go read that article when it gets up there, but it just seems very uncertain, and it seems like they're counting on a lot of guys to take big, like not little steps. Like A&M needs Shamar Stewart to take a little step to be like, hey, that player you were at the end of last year, we're going to play you a lot more snaps, but just keep doing that and get a little bit better. Like they need guys that didn't do much at all to get a lot better. And the more I look into Florida, the more I feel confident. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. We played 0 games, so this can all change. After we play Notre Dame and they play Miami, we're going to know a heck of a lot more. But that kind of brings me, while I gotta take a little break here, we talk about this schedule and it's setting up well for A&M and all that sort of stuff. But I mentioned this briefly on Monday. But when you look at pretty much everyone on this, like all the Power 5 teams on the schedule, if this year's A&M team had to play those teams, I would be less optimistic. And I'll tell you why. The reason is those teams lost a lot of NFL players, like literally like to the NFL draft. And they recruit well, but the best recruiter on your schedule is Texas. We'll get to them later in the show. But, a team like Missouri losing 5 defensive players to the NFL draft, how do you backfill that without, like they're starting to recruit very well in the high school ranks. I think they're doing some good stuff in high school recruiting. Don't want to blame it all on NIL, but I'm sure they're up to speed as far as that goes. But that's right now. Like that's not on their team yet. I think they tried to go hard after some transfers. They actually got one of the guys from Florida that transferred, Chris McClellan. But they lost a first round defensive end. They lost both starting linebackers. They lost a whole bunch of guys on the D line. Almost everyone that played more than 200 snaps has graduated or gone to the NFL. Both starting linebackers, both corners were drafted. Both very, I can't remember the rounds. I think one was second, one was fourth. Maybe second's too high, but they both got picked. Both very good players, and I think a safety got picked as well. Now, they went and got Toriano Pride out of the transfer portal at corner from Clemson. He was a big-time prospect. He should be pretty good and be able to backfill there. But when you look at it as a whole, they took a lot of guys on the D-line and at linebacker that were either from like smaller programs or just didn't really just set the world. Like they got a guy from Florida who was just okay. Another one of their guys that was, a decent player. They got a guy from Michigan State who was okay. They got a defensive end from Georgia. You might be thinking, oh, there's been defensive end transfers from Georgia that have gone in the first round, like Jermaine Johnson. But I don't think this is one of those guys. He could be. I could be very wrong. But like when you look at, it's like just take the big 4. Notre Dame lost one elite tackle in Joe Alt and another draft pick in Blake Fisher. Both starting linebackers for them as well, and a couple other guys. But like those are the big ones. The 2 tackles, the 2 linebackers. If those 2 tackles are playing for them this year, then that advantage for A&M is not nearly as big. Love Nick Scorton, love Shamar Stewart, but Joe Alt was a beast of a left tackle. So that's one of those games where if Like even if they had the same quarterback with Hartman, who I think is not as good as the guy they have now, that'd be a way tougher game because of those two tackles. But you look at Missouri, the guys we just talked about. Missouri's left tackle got drafted in like the fourth round, I think. He was awesome. I watched them play against Tennessee. Everyone's hyping up James Pierce Jr. as a first overall pick. And he may very well be, but he was not that against Missouri. And he's kind of a lighter guy, and Mizzou had a big left tackle that just kind of bullied him all game. But that guy's gone. They got a guy from SMU to come fill in. I think they'll still be good on the offensive line. But what Missouri lost wasn't even a big-time NFL player, but their running back, Cody Schrader. You watch some of their games, and some of the games they ended up pulling off, a lot of that was on him, and really not anything impressive physically. Like, he didn't get drafted because of that, but he ended up on a practice or on a undrafted free agent deal somewhere. But he's a former walk-on, just played with so much just effort and energy, and just I bet Missouri fans freaking just love that kid. He did so much for them last year, and they went and got some transfer backs who were supposed to be good, and maybe they will be. But I think the way that guy played was just a different kind of animal. LSU, obvious. I mean, the obvious on offense, the Heisman winning quarterback who went second overall, and the two receivers that went in the first round. If those guys are back, and even with what's crazy is you can look at all this and say, even with those guys, A&M still had the lead against LSU with their third string quarterback in the fourth quarter with a lame duck, a fired head coach and interim staff, and the team was beat to hell, and I'm sure that the guys played hard, but it's hard to really be into it when all that stuff's going on. And even that LSU team that was so great on offense, we still went in there and gave them hell. And so that's like that. Like, you could say that about all the games that we lost last year, maybe with the exception of Miami, but it's just things were so close, and you look at all the things of this team that improve or that should improve, and it's hard to not be optimistic about it. But I digress. On LSU's defense, last season both defensive tackles went to the NFL and got drafted. Mason Smith and Mekhi Wingo. If those guys are back, I feel differently about that game, because even if they're better in the secondary this year, which that's a big question mark, they don't have much of anything at defensive tackle. Like, they got a true freshman that Dominic McKinley that flipped from us. He's from Louisiana, so it makes sense. But when we started having turnover here, he flipped back to them. 5-star kid, and I think he's going to be really, really good eventually. But if they have to count on him this season, that's not good. You don't want a true freshman defensive tackle being what you have to rely on. And I don't think he's penciled in to start right now, but you lost 2 draft picks. You got a guy from Wisconsin that's going to start who's he's just fine. There's nothing like, I don't think they went and got any difference makers in the portal. And you even heard him, you pretty much heard Brian Kelly say that in an interview, like after they lost the defensive tackle, Dominic Williams to Oklahoma. They're like, oh, we're not buying players, like these other teams. I'm like, well, maybe you should be. Maybe you should be trying to get, and they were trying to get him, but they probably just, came up a little short for whatever reason. But LSU is a prime example of, if we had to play last year's team, I'd be like, man, like, I like our DBs, but trying to cover Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas with Jane Daniels running around, I don't think he ran at the combine, but God, he's got to run a 4.4, that would be tough. That'd be tough. And then Texas, I mean, we'll get into more Texas stuff here in a sec, but, I don't even know all the guys. They had so many guys get drafted, like more than they have in years. And, I'll come back to this, but man, it really feels like last year was their shot at the whole thing. And I don't know if this year or even next year is going to be the team that can do it for them. But both those big defensive tackles, I mean, talk about LSU's, these guys were way better than those guys. I mean, Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, Yeah, a first round pick, I think a second round pick, Outland trophy winner. You watch their games last year when they're on defense, and the teams they're playing, you know, teams in the Big 12, even Alabama, at that point, they couldn't handle those guys. And even like their secondary was not good last year. It didn't even matter because quarterbacks were getting, you know, 360 pounds in their face every time they dropped back to throw the football. And honestly, you know, even though those guys are gone, their edge players, their defensive ends are actually pretty good, and they're all back. But the two defensive tackles, the starting linebacker, top five, I think, pass catchers, all four starting receivers, and Jonathan Brooks, who was great. This A&M team playing that Texas team is good. As much as I like this A&M team, I don't know that I would be. I know that I would not be near as optimistic as I am as I sit here today looking at that game if it's last year's roster for Texas versus this year. So it's just and look, they recruit well, they got guys, but it just seems like one of those years where a lot of the teams on this schedule were kind of built for last season, and this is more of a rebuilding year for those teams. But we'll see. It's still all TBD. All right, so let's see. Notre Dame, Florida, Arkansas. We have not talked Arkansas yet. So the two, as forgiving as this schedule is, the two parts that you kind of wish were flip-flopped was you wish you got Arkansas and Florida later in the year and not in September. Because I think both coaches, or I should say, I think neither coach makes it to the end of the season without getting fired. Arkansas was 4-8 last year. Florida was 5-7. Florida's win total per Vegas is 4.5. I know the schedule is tough, but man, that is nuts to have a 4.5 win total at the University of Florida. That's the thing is it's realistic. That's why Vegas made it that number. If they go 4-8, he's out of there. He's done. Arkansas, awful offensive line last season. I don't think it got any better, to be honest. You lose your center and your right guard that you've had for 6 years because of COVID and red shirts and whatever else. They played forever. They're gone. The two tackles, I know one transferred. I think one of them's still there. I have to check their projected lineup, but that unit was awful for them. There's a handful of games on this schedule where I'm like, man, these guys are not going to block A&M, and Arkansas is example number one, like the top example of that. So I don't want to demean, like it's an SEC game. We all know weird things happen in that building when we play that team. Anything could happen there. So, but it's crazy that like some guys that were like that you think of when you think of Arkansas the last couple of years. Rocket Sanders at running back, KJ Jefferson at quarterback. Both guys transferred elsewhere this offseason. KJ to UCF, Rocket Sanders to, I believe, South Carolina. Honestly, I do like what they have at receiver and tight end, and I like the running back they got. So if they could fix the offensive line, things may not be as bad for them. I do think they got a new offensive line coach, if I'm not mistaken. But they got Jaquindon Jackson from Utah to transfer in. I've always loved him at running back. Former Duncanville quarterback back in the day. Luke Haas was a very, very bright emerging tight end for them last year as a true freshman. I think he was hurt for the year against A&M, but he was off to a very hot start. Isaac Tesla, Antonio Armstrong. There's a couple other guys they got, but what's going to be tough for them, and it's the same thing it was last year. I don't know if they were able to really improve at all. Is their offensive line and really everywhere on defense. They got a good defensive end, Landon Jackson. He's getting some first round draft love already. As we sit here in August. Really good player. He's really blossomed into, you know, when he was coming out of high school and A&M was looking at him, he may have even be committed at one point. I think he was, but he was all potential. He's 6'6", long arms, long limbs, but very quick and explosive. You're like, man, if he can, get in a college weight room and really commit, he can be a really good player. And that's, exactly what he's done. He's terrific. But you look elsewhere, and both of their linebackers transferred out. They lost a couple of DBs to the NFL. I think one guy maybe even retired or just stopped playing football altogether. But it's and Arkansas is going to be one of those teams that hits the portal hard every year. And sometimes it's going to be they got a defensive tackle from the D2 ranks in 2021, and he was awesome. John Ridgway tore up A&M's O-line, in that game. But it's going to be, I think that kind of guy is the outlier, like the guy you get from a D2 or a Mountain West MAC program. There's some good players that are going to come out of there. But for Arkansas, I think they're going to end up getting a lot more of the just okay players. And, they're going to be veterans, so that should help, the experience and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's honestly good for Arkansas that they don't have to sit there and wait on, if they get a good freshman class, they don't need to wait 3 years to get some like experienced players on their team. They can go out and and get some guys, but Arkansas is not a team that honestly should be in a game with this A&M team, especially due to the offensive line. So Missouri's getting a lot of love right now. Preseason top 10. The coaches poll came out last week. By the way, A&M's number 20. We did not talk about that at all on Monday's show. We should have, but I know Missouri and LSU and Notre Dame and Texas are all up there. So Missouri's getting a lot of love, and they should. I think Drinkowitz is a great head coach. I believe he still calls the plays. He's done a great job there. They may have the single best player in college with Luther Burden at receiver. So they bring him back. They bring back Theo Weiss. A&M fans will know that name. He was a big recruit when Jimbo was trying to get his first class signed here. So he's super experienced, solid player. Mookie Cooper is another kind of slot receiver that's an older player and pretty good as well. And they lost a couple guys on the O-line, but they went and got, big story was they went and got Caden Green from Oklahoma. Oklahoma fans were pissed off about that. But he's going to play at left guard for them. And the aforementioned Marcus Bryant from SMU should be their starting left tackle. He was I think he was all AAC last season, so he should be good. But certainly that's the thing about these big four. Like, they all have, with the exception of Notre Dame, like they all have. That's probably the three best offensive lines that A&M will face, and they're all the three like best overall teams. So that's where you kind of get not too out over your skis. We're like, oh, like we have this great defensive line, we're going to dominate everybody. Well, there's some good offensive lines on the schedule, so let's not get too far out there. But they got good O-line, really good receivers. The quarterback Brady Cook, he's not going to be an NFL guy, but I think for a college quarterback, he's a plus player as a college quarterback. So that's going to be interesting. On their defense, I think is where A&M has a pretty nice advantage. They lost, almost every defensive lineman that took a snap. They bring back Christian Williams at defensive tackle. He's good, but not anything special. I like the defensive end Johnny Walker Jr., but I think he shined a lot more having the guy that went in the first round, Darius Robinson, on the other side. I think that made life a little bit easier for him. We'll see how their transfers do, but I think it's tough to, it sounds rich for me to say that when we're counting on a transfer with Nick Scorton, but Nick Scorton's getting mocked in the first round draft. Led his conference in sacks. Some of the other guys, that teams got from the transfer portal didn't do that, and that's why this all takes some nuance to look into, and those guys could be good players, but it's we'll see. Linebacker, they got a guy number 30. I think his name's Chuck Hicks. I'm not a big fan. There's games where he's actually pretty good, and he'll play downhill and play fast. But there's others where I'm like, man, this guy's lost, or he's not the biggest guy in the world. He can kind of get eaten up by some of those big offensive linemen. But he's not a bad player. They got a couple of they went really hard at transfers at linebacker, so we'll see how that plays out. But I think the drop off from last year's defense to this one, and that's honestly, everyone wants to talk about Luther Burden and the passing game, and that's all great, but running game and defense, it's gonna come up here in a second too, with another team. But running game and defense really was kind of their calling card last year. And look, it's impressive to win 11 games at Missouri. A&M fans would love an 11-win season any way we can get it at any point. It's been a while, but it just like I said earlier, that seems like that was their chance. Last year, if there's a 12-team playoff last year, Missouri's in it. They absolutely would have been. So, but with the losses they had, and just now kind of picking up in recruiting, I think they could be a team that's more of a perennial contender down the line. But I don't know if they have the juice this year. But they're going to score points, and they're probably going to be in a lot of shootouts with their defense. At Mississippi State, I'm not going to take a ton of time on this. A&M should win that game by a lot, to be honest. It's after a bye week. They have, they're starting from absolute scratch. Rest in peace to Mike Leach. But after that, they promoted the defensive coordinator to head coach. He could not look. I remember watching some of their games. They're getting their ass kicked, and he's just standing on the sideline, just arms crossed, just looks like he doesn't give a crap at all. And I'm like, dude, they got to fire this guy today. And they obviously they fired him. They got Jeff Lebby, OU's offensive coordinator. Offense could actually be okay. They're going to throw the ball a ton. They got Blake Shapen, the quarterback from Baylor. They got some decent weapons at receiver. They're going to be down a lot in games, so they're probably just going to go bombs away and go super fast on offense and try to push the ball down the field. On defense, and I'm being frank, I have not done a deep dive on Mississippi State, but looking at where they're power rated, looking at some of the players that I know they lost in the portal, there's just not a lot there yet. I think Lebby can be a good coach, but this is not the year that I think Mississippi State's going to go and even make a ball game or anything of that sort. So sorry, Bulldogs. LSU we hit on a lot earlier, but I forgot to put the ticker up there. I'll go ahead and do that now. We are still learning how to do this. Solo. So what is the best position group that A&M will face? Is it Notre Dame's secondary? Is it Texas's receivers? I think it's LSU's offensive line. Both tackles will. So the left tackle, Will Campbell, he's going to be a top 10 pick, no matter what, unless barring injury. Knock on wood, don't put that on him. He's a top 10 lock at left tackle. The right tackle, Emory Jones, he's getting first round love. Very, very good player. The two guards both returned from last season. I think the center is the only guy they lost. They're trying to work that out, but they got some options. That's a really well coached and a very talented offensive line. And that's the game where you circle and you say, hey, if this D line is legit, we've already seen them against Notre Dame, against Florida and Arkansas, even Missouri by that point. Missouri will definitely be the best offensive line they've faced up to this point, but can they do it against the best? I think LSU probably has the best O line in the country, and I think it's easily the best unit on the schedule. But A&M's D line may be the best unit on their schedule. So that's October 26th. That's going to be a hell of a battle. Turnover at quarterback. I think Garrett Nussmeier can be pretty dang good. Coach's son, his coach Doug Nussmeier has coached at the Cowboys in Alabama and Michigan and all over. So this kid's pretty sharp. I think he looks very natural passing the football. What's weird is, so this time of year I try to check out other teams' websites and I try to check out like what are they like. I can see what our practices. I see our clips. Like what do their clips look like? Like what are their writers saying about their team? And some of their guys are like, yeah, Nussmeier, he's kind of up and down. He's not super consistent yet, which is surprising. I would have had Nussmeier, pretty high on my SEC quarterback list coming in, but as a full-time starter, sounds like maybe it could take a little while for him to really figure it out. They've got dudes at receiver, but it's not going to be what it was last year. I don't think there's 2 first-round picks in this bunch. Kyron Lacey is super physically gifted. Has been kind of the third guy the past couple years, but he's struggled with some drops. And when you do that 1 year, and it's like, okay, you can improve. It's first year as a starter, blah blah blah. But when you have 2 seasons, and I'll go check the numbers on this, but it seemed like that was still kind of an issue for him. So if he gets that fixed, he can be great. He's a very physical receiver and can, he can make the tough catches, but just make the ones that hit you in the hands. I know they got a receiver from Liberty that's supposed to be good. They're saying good things about Chris Hilton, who's kind of a speedster that they've recruited, I think in his 3rd year now. So they got dudes. They apparently love their tight end room. They got 2 or 3 guys there that can be good players. So that'll be interesting to watch, with a new offensive coordinator, new guy calling plays, see what they want to do. Running backs are okay. I really like the sophomore Caleb Jackson. I think he's probably one of he could be one of the better backs in the SEC. Made a big jump physically from freshman year to sophomore. At least it seems that way. So keep an eye on him. On defense, and I reserve the right to be very wrong on this, but LSU's defense was bad last year. It was probably the worst one in their history. And I don't know what they are thinking that they did to make it better this year. I will say, however, they improved the coaching. They got a new DC with Blake Baker from Missouri. He's very sharp. They took Bo Davis back from Texas on the defensive line to coach their D-line. He's one of the best. And they got Corey Raymond back from Florida, who's terrific. But you need better players to go with that good coaching. This sounds almost, blasphemous to say, but it's true. They were like, LSU's been great on defense since we joined the conference, but last year they were terrible. This year, I don't want to say it could be worse, but when you look at when they ran their first practice, they put their 11 starters out there. I'm like, how many of these guys started A&M? And on the defensive line, it's 0. No doubt about that in my mind. The bigger question would be which of those guys would be on our 2 deep, if we're being honest with ourselves. And then Harold Perkins was so good as a freshman, 5-star, just freak athlete. But due to his size, he only weighs 215, maybe 220, and they don't know where to put him. He's a great edge player and could likely be, an All-American edge player in college, but he's never going to play edge in the NFL. He's too small. So he's inside at weak side linebacker. They tried to play him there last year, wasn't great. The other linebacker, they got these two brothers, both last name Weeks. They're fine players. I think Greg Penn the third. He's a little bit older now. Should be better. But the secondary for them, like that's one of the schools that claims DBU. And you look at any NFL team, and like I bet half NFL teams have an LSU defensive back on their team, and it's not gonna be any of these guys that that do that. I mean, and look, like they had guys last year, like a guy they're really high on is Ashton Stamps, and need to look into him a little bit more and see if he was the problem last year. I think they had some other guys that were probably bigger issues, but that secondary is really going to have to change and be a lot better if they want to, they think they can win 10 or 11 games at LSU this year. And with the performance that they had last year on defense, you can't have that again. But what's stunning is the talent on the defensive line. They got some young guys, some true freshmen that are going to be good one day, but their starters this year I don't think are anything special. And in the secondary, and even a linebacker, like Harold Perkins is a great player, but is he a great middle linebacker, inside linebacker? I don't know. So yeah, they got to do some soul searching if this doesn't work out. So we'll see. Let's see who's next. South Carolina, actually pretty good on the D line. They got some guys back from last year's team. Should be pretty solid there. Everywhere else, man, beats me. Like I don't think their offensive line's going to be that good. I don't know if their quarterback. I know he's kind of more of a dual threat guy. We'll know a lot more by the time this game comes around and see how he does as a passer. And then I know they have the freak at receiver. The 6'3", 235-pound kid that ran like a 10-1 or 10 flat 100 meter, like something crazy, like literal Olympic speed, but in a 6'3", 235-pound body. Yeah, he's going to be great. I'm sure. But and they got Rocket Sanders at running back from Arkansas. But aside from that, I just don't know. Like Arkansas, like Mississippi State, this is the third team on the schedule where they will not be able to block A&M, in my opinion. We'll see when it gets here, but as it sits today, they should not be able to block A&M's front four for 4 quarters. On defense, I think defensive line should be good. They lost some guys. One of their top linebackers went to Florida, and Pup Howard. I don't really know what they have on the back end, but it's as far as your away games go, your away games being Florida, Mississippi State, South Carolina up to this point, that's pretty dang manageable. For a first year head coach with this kind of talent, it's pretty manageable. New Mexico State, you wouldn't think we'd have to talk about them, but they beat Auburn last year. So I'll give a tip of the cap to New Mexico State, our fellow Aggies. They lost everyone and every coach from that team last year. So I just, to my point earlier, if this was last year's team, maybe I'm a little more concerned, but yeah, it's, that's a home game. It's New Mexico State. You should win it. At Auburn, Auburn's getting hype, and I'm pretty sure it is 100% based on signing a couple of 5-star receivers, and that's great. I think they're 5-star. I think Cam Coleman in particular, he was committed here for a long time, ended up sticking with the home team or going back to the home team. He's great. He's going to be in the NFL. I will almost guarantee it. If he doesn't got his head on straight and wants to put in the work, he will be an NFL receiver. There's no doubt. But as a true freshman, do you want to count on that to be, your whole offense? They kept Peyton Thorne. I could end this thing right now with they kept Peyton Thorne. I mean, what he did against A&M last year was one of the worst quarterback performances you will see from a SEC quarterback at Kyle Field. It was awful. They threw for like 20 yards in that game. I'm not joking. It was that bad. I heard one of the writers say I think it was a guest on Texas radio during media days that they should have one of the top 5 O lines in the country. That's baloney. Like that's I'm sorry, unless everyone on that offensive line just got way better, and or maybe they just brought in 5 new guys, maybe, but I don't see that at all when I look at Auburn. Now Jarquez Hunter, I think he's a really good running back. I think he's an SEC like 18, 20 carry a game, bell cow type of guy. But that doesn't really, as far as A&M goes, I don't think you're going to beat A&M by running for a ton of yards. So on defense, Auburn's another one that lost 5 guys to the NFL, just like Missouri did, and some really good players in the secondary. Good. I think defensive tackle got drafted as well, and I'll do a deep dive on Auburn as in the coming weeks. But as it sits here today, I mean it's Peyton Thorne. I don't care that we play him over there, and I don't care that it's right before Texas. But man, it's if A&M loses that game, and look, this is months away at this point. I'll probably be a dad by that point. My kid's doing the 26th in November, so a lot of things can change. But when I look at that, I'm like, man, I just don't really know. So far to recap through the first 11 games, big ones: Notre Dame, tough, but would probably favor us a little bit at the moment with their injury situation. Missouri might be a little shootouty. Was kind of down on their O line until I looked into it a little bit more. I think their O line could still be pretty dang good. They kept a lot of the receivers back. They got Luther Burton, who's awesome, and Brady Cook, and Drinkwitz is a good coach. So I think that's a ball where A&M might need to really lean on the run game and kind of control the clock a bit to keep that offense off the field. LSU, I don't know. It's tough to if they can neutralize your best thing about your team. If their O line can kind of stifle your D line a little bit, that could open things up. Maybe our guys can't cover for that long. So, I think those two are a little more toss-uppy than Notre Dame. And then Texas, what's interesting about Texas, and if you go back to some of our older episodes, I talked a lot of crap about Texas, and I will probably continue to do that. But from an objective standpoint, here's my thoughts on them. So their offensive line is very, very good. Probably second best on the schedule outside of LSU, after LSU. All new receivers. They reloaded, through the portal. Younger guys like Jonte Cook, former 5-star. He's a sophomore now. He should start and be very good. They got Isaiah Bond from Alabama, very fast. They got a couple nice tight ends. They got the tight end Amari Niblack from Alabama, as well as Gunnar Helm, one of their homegrown guys. But what's interesting about Texas to me is when you watch it, it's easy to kind of get wrapped up in what they did throwing the ball last year, but when Quinn Ewers was, say, like playing on the road or just playing, when he was inconsistent and they kind of got in a bind, they would just hand the ball to Jonathan Brooks, and their offensive line would mow down those little Big 12 D lines, and they'd run for 1,000 yards. And it didn't matter that Quinn Ewers had a bad day that day. In this league, even against Kentucky would probably have the best D line in the Big 12 this year. That may be a stretch. They have a D tackle that's going to be a first-round pick. And I'm sure Utah or somebody has a really good defensive line. But I'm just saying, week to week, you're not going to play Houston and BYU and Iowa State, in this conference. There's guys that actually weigh 300 pounds, 330 pounds that you're going to be playing. And when your quarterback's having a bad day, and now your top running back is out for the season, I just think it's interesting. I think it's something to watch. And you think Texas, you think, oh, Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, Quinn Ewers throwing bombs, and they'll do some of that this year. I mean, I'm not saying they're going to suck on offense. I'm just saying, they go on the road. I mean, Michigan, week 2. Folks are down on Michigan. Oh, they lost everybody at the draft. But that defense, I mean, even with Baxter, they're not going to run on that defense. And I don't know if you're going to throw on Will Johnson, the top, who's a easy top 10, top 15 draft pick next season. So I think what I'm trying to say is the running aspect of their offense is a very underrated thing that people don't really talk about with Texas. It's all Quinn Ewers, all Sark this and offense and throwing the ball. But when things get bad, they've handed the ball to Bijan. They've handed the ball to Jonathan Brooks. And even to Cedric Baxter. If they had just done that a little bit more against Washington, they might have played for a title last season. So it's interesting. That's what I'm saying. On defense, I'm not going to go as far as to say they're going to be bad because I don't know if I believe that. But it kind of feels like those two monsters in the middle for them, T'Vondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, like similar to the running game, that bailed them out of a lot of stuff. Like if their DBs were getting beat, most of the time it didn't matter because those two guys would just wreck the pocket of the opposing quarterback, and you couldn't run on them at all. You're not moving T'Vondre Sweat out of the way. So they have some older guys at defensive tackle. Like they're not totally bare there. They went and got some guys in the portal. But again, I don't think any of those guys are all conference caliber, like true stud, anywhere near the guys they lost. So that's interesting. They did get a good defensive end from UTSA. I think he was voted all conference for preseason SEC. Good player. They got Barron Sorrell and Ethan Burke. Both those guys did some really good things at defensive end last year, putting pressure on quarterbacks. So their outside pass rush should be good. Interior, I don't know. I think it's going to be a big drop off from last season. Jalen Ford was a good linebacker for them. Anthony Hill, guy every A&M fan wanted, 5-star linebacker, should take a next step and be a great player for them. But it's their secondary. Their best guy last year was probably Ryan Watts. He's off to the NFL. Terrence Brooks transferred out. They've got, and looking at their practice reports, which I don't do a ton. I try to not even read their stuff, but they've got guys in different spots and like guys they didn't think would be starters are. And I don't know. It could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, but something to watch is how does Texas's running game look without C.J. Baxter, and what can they do, and against better opponents, obviously, and is the secondary any improved at all from last year? If it's not, and you don't have the two, studs in your defensive line, this 11-1 that people are predicting gets a lot less likely. So that's all I got today. It's been an hour. Whenever I sit down by myself to do this, I don't think I can do this for an hour, and then I kind of get to where I'm like, oh, I need to probably wrap it up. So, but appreciate you guys as always. Subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, however you choose to consume this product. Just make sure you're subscribed. I don't want you to miss anything. So Monday nights and Wednesday nights for the live streams. Obviously, Tuesday and Thursday mornings for the podcast feed. But thanks so much. I appreciate it, guys. Check out goodbullhunting.com. Really ramping up our some written content from yours truly. And you can follow me on Twitter at WillStoneCFB. I will talk to you guys. Wait, here at the buzzer, I got a comment. That is from my boy Ralphie, one of the few Longhorn fans that I like, Ralph Merez. Good stuff, Will. Love you and hook 'em. Ralphie, appreciate you listening. I'll try to not be too hard on your Longhorns. But yeah, thanks guys, and I'll talk to y'all on Monday. See ya.